partner at Scribes Services, as well as Daniel Mainye, who is the Cytonn Technologies Business Manager. Thank you for joining us, gentlemen. Let me begin with you, Bernard. You've listened to what Wananchi is saying. You've been seeing on the news and just the different issues of the scandals. What is your feeling about this first and foremost?
Well, I think we've reached a stage where now we're able to report these issues. Nonetheless, I'd really want to emphasize the need for us to keep dealing with these matters. Let's face the issue head on, now that we have the information.
Okay.
Yeah, and I don't think it's really anything new. Just because we're able to report doesn't mean it's happened now. It's been happening. I think that's now the difference. We're able now to see this and get all the information we need.
Okay, yeah. Daniel.
Thanks, Dan, for this chance. Now, I think for me, fundamentally, is to ask ourselves: do we accept that we have a corruption issue? Because for every problem, you have to start with the basics. Do you accept that we have a problem? And clearly, even the citizens are saying we have a problem, and somebody needs to rise to the occasion and fix it. Is it government? Is it Dan? Is it me? Is it Bernard? I think that's where now the biggest debate comes in, because I think right now we're in that situation where everybody's throwing blows without necessarily coming and saying we need to fix this thing and this is how we are going to fix it. So it's a nice conversation to have, especially at that level of government, but also even at the smaller levels of private sector players in this particular market. We have both corporates, we have families as well. That discussion needs to actually move from till that level.
Okay, and just to pick up, just stay with you for a bit. The fact that we've got a lot of these resources, hard-earned money of the Mwananchi, yes, being stolen, what is on the broader scale, what is the impact it has on the economy?
I think first of all, I could tell you 1,000,001 issues that the economy ends up being affected by graft. Take a good example, healthcare. When money is being siphoned out into graft, what does that mean? We can't afford a basic machine in hospital, so we have to travel very long distances to get proper healthcare. What does that mean in terms of prices for goods? It means now things start skyrocketing. The price for unga moves from your typical 50 shillings, it goes to 100 shillings. So there's a big impact that this aspect of corruption actually has into the market. If you look at the recent the statistics, which is that in Kenya, a third of our total country budget goes into corruption. What does that mean? So last year we had a budget of around 2.3 trillion. If you just look at that statistics, that tells you we are losing around 600 billion into corruption. What does 600 billion represent in terms of our economy, in terms of food, in terms of healthcare, in terms of investment? And literally look at it also from the perspective of people watching. The people who really want to invest in Kenya are watching this. And will somebody want to come and put their money where they know it will automatically be stolen? No. So there's really a big impact that this corruption is having on our economy.
Okay, you've got something to add.
I think just to add to that, the impact on capital flight is very, very high. The Kenya Gazette is published on a weekly basis every Friday. Just a quick look through the last 1 year, you'll see the number of companies who've closed shop, and most, you interact with them on a one-on-one, tell them, we just can't compete anymore because I quoted a third of what the person who won the bid quoted, and they still got the job. We have the expertise, but we have to be really able to learn how to deal with these people. Nonetheless, I think we need to look at this in its entirety. What is the private sector's role in this? Because the government is the biggest buyer, and they buy from the private sector. So what have we done, really, those of us who run corporates? Be it the small sole proprietorship to the biggest corporate. Really, are we really watching to make sure that we're able to dissuade this? It's got to a level where big companies, or rather entities who are really trying to keep within the morals, are not attracted anymore to tender for government jobs.
Okay, and he brings in a very good aspect in terms of the private sector, because ultimately government may not always be trading with itself. It will not be trading itself. It's trading with the private sector, and which we've had there cases where there's been corruption even in the private sector. Okay, and maybe because you work with them a lot, Bernard, you work with companies, private firms a lot. What are the weak points when it comes to private firms in terms of the corruption, people stealing or bypassing systems there? Is it the same thing that we see in government?
Exactly. It's, like I said earlier, before you even, there are many advertisements on jobs, for jobs, delivery of services, goods. But really the first question we ask ourselves is, do I really want to do this? Because of the risk. You don't want to get a job and then a few years later to hear that you skipped a step in the procurement stage. So it becomes very, very difficult. And I know even many entities have also tried to streamline the procurement among the private entities. However, it's really a moral issue, if you ask me. We have all the paperwork right. All the checklist is there. Do this, do this, do this. But really, it's what the individual seated behind that desk does.
Okay, so maybe for us to understand, because one of the issues that's coming up usually, we've had many times that procurement is one of the hotspots when it comes to corruption, be it in government or otherwise. For instance, in government, any of you can just jump into this. Yes. What is the tendering process? What if, for example, all three of us want to bid to provide glasses to a certain company, government agency? What is the process that we go through?
So if you look at the government process right now, of course, it's all automated, so it's IFMIS. So you have to go online, you have to apply, get pre-qualified as a supplier. The next step, of course, is that they float the tender, you go in and bid. So Bernard will bid, I'll bid, you bid. And then, of course, they have their stipulated process where they take 14 days to evaluate your tender, and then from there, either tell you whether you've gotten awarded or not. So the process is very clear. You know, when you look at it, it's already documented, it is there, it's supposed to work. Yeah. But now, then there's, remember, corruption is not, as I said, corruption is not, it's not a government issue. Corruption is driven by human nature and greed. Yeah. So you can have all the processes and the systems in place, but provided there's that still the aspect of human nature, greed comes into play. So when Bernard literally is a startup business trying to work with government, has quoted the right price and everything, but then somebody else goes and, has a different conversation, and then thing all ends becoming a whole mess. So the process is there, the structures are there, the systems are there to enforce this. But really, we need to talk fundamentally about the human nature and the greed and all that thing really is affecting how procurement is done in government.
Okay, just before we continue the conversation, let's cross over to Parliament, where CS for Agriculture, Mwangi. I'm speaking to what President Uhuru Kenyatta has been talking about, there being a lot of corruption in the government, and not only in government, but also in the agencies and the people who trade with government. And he has said that each person shall carry their own cross, that no one should go and defend thieves. That if someone has stolen, they have stolen, whether they are your tribesman, whether they're your friend, your colleague, or otherwise. But the president has said that everybody must carry their own cross. And he has once again, and which is something he's been doing throughout his tenure, warned those who are dealing corruptly that they shall have firm action taken against them. And so as we come to a close of our conversation, just to bring back the conversation to studio with my guests, that is Daniel Mainye and Bernard Kiragu. Gentlemen, we've listened to the president. He's spoken tough again on corruption. And he said, everybody will carry their own cross. And we've also had the CS saying that, they admit that there have been anomalies when it comes to some tradings at NCPB. I'll come to you, Daniel. Yeah. What effect is there when the president does this in terms of the economy? Or is it something that investors, I'm talking about investment, there are people who will choose not to invest in Kenya, for instance, because they feel there's too much corruption, so it's too risky to put my money in there. Does this kind of a pronouncement come across as PR, which is hot air to investors, or are they able to discern beyond this and say that this is actually action being taken?
So Dan, I would want to look at it in a sort of a different manner. And one thing that I would like to echo is is setting a tone. So if you look at the example of Singapore, went through the same cycle that we are in. You know, they were British colony, they went into a very long phase of corruption, then Lee Kuan Yew took leadership. And the first thing that he did was to set a tone that we are not going to accept corruption anymore, and we are going to do something about it. So that's the first step. And clearly you can see there's a lot of will from the leadership that we need to set this tone that we are not going to accept corruption. The second bit of it, what he did was this needs to be a strong political will. Yeah. So at government, at private sector, going down to the basic fundamentals of family, there has to be that will that we really need to get this thing. And I would commend, you know, we need to continue having the conversation, yeah? Let's continue having this conversation about corruption, because at a certain point, the immediate time you give up, that's when we come back to the same problem again. So we have to continue having this conversation until we have proper addressable issues. The third thing is we have to set the right culture. Because every time we talk about it, it is human, it's human, it's human. We have to set the right culture. And it starts from the basics. We've talked about this thing. You know, stop bribing your child to go to church. Because when they grow up, for them, they'll feel like this is a norm. You know, like giving something for a benefit is a norm. You know, we have to fundamentally start sorting out from that level. Our education systems, we really need to work on improving education systems so that ethics is integrated into the core of what we teach our children. Because when they grow up to become the presidents and the CEOs of these corporates, they'll really understand the value of integrity. Because otherwise we'll continue talking and talking, but if you don't sort that fundamental aspect, then we still have corruption going on. And then the last thing, we really need to put a lot of effort in terms of our institutions. The institutions that we look up to sort out these issues. And it will be good to commend government, because we're starting to see a lot of action around corruption and, you know, people being arrested and being, so that they can answer for this thing. So our institutions, the DCI, the DPP, judiciary, we are really seeing a lot of efforts trying towards to fight this, but we can do more. We can do more.
Okay. Kiragu.
Yeah, I think it's very well put, but tough talk should be coupled with sufficient follow-through. Once we set the right example, we're done. This is a fight we can win. But I was to stick with the companies. I'm happy to hear you mention Embakasi Ranching, which is an unlisted public company. We tend to over-police the listed entities and issuers. But I think it's about time we discussed whether the Capital Market Authority's corporate governance code should be applied across board to all public companies. Because all these failings really affect corporates. The same people you find in these unlisted companies are the same people who are also running the listed entities. So we all need to have same rules applying to all of us.
I could agree more. I couldn't agree more. If the corporate governance, the corporate governance code could be applied across, it would really, really help us. Because fundamentally, if you have the wrong governance structure, whether at that private sector, government level, you'll have these problems coming up every other day. So we really, and I think it's something that if can be applied across, whether you're in private sector, you're in government, or you're that startup business, there's a level of corporate governance that you need to have.
Okay, just in closing remarks, gentlemen, what do you feel the impact is, and you alluded to it earlier when we began, the impact is on for instance, one of the biggest issues right now is unemployment.
Yes.
Do we see any correlation between corruption and unemployment as you do your closing remarks?
There is, and a big one for that matter, as in if we continue having money going to a few guys' pockets and all that, and yet we have the latest statistic, I think it's 46% of our youth are unemployed, looking for jobs every other day, and yet there are few people who are actually taking that resources onto them. So it will still affect unemployment one way or the other until we address it and we get our youth jobs who can actually give back to the economy. But for my closing remarks, I think we are at a stage where we can define the future for Kenya. We are at a stage where we really have to, you know, now stop playing politics about corruption and really get things done, because if we don't get these things done, we don't have a future for our children. Our children will come into an economy that they can't get anything. You know, you can't develop, you can get investors for your business, you can get food to your family. So it's the collective effort for each individual to come up and say, I'm going to fight this thing.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the feeling here is, I think now you'll start seeing banks going back and asking people to always provide supporting documentation for bankings above $1 million shillings, which is a requirement that has been there. So I guess increasingly you'll find that this dirty money will not necessarily circulate in the economy because people will not be able to account for it. So it's a natural consequence that when this money, corrupt, dirty money will not necessarily help this economy.
Okay, thank you very much, gentlemen, and good information there. We have to close our conversation there so we can cross over to Parliament, but thank you, Bernard Kiragu, partner at Scribes Services, as well as Daniel Mainye.
Yes.
Mainye, who is the Cytonn Technologies Business Manager, for sharing your information and your insight on this topic in terms of the cost of corruption, rather not the cost of corruption, but the state of corruption and the impact it has on the economy, and the economy spanning across various things. And we've touched quite a bit in terms of the private sector, the aspect of the principles that should be adhered to so as to ensure that corruption is curtailed, as well as looking at different aspects of the fact that it can affect different elements such as jobs.